Hi. So I took like a 45-minute break to doodle something for another server because they're doing like a little profile contest thing. And I thought, fuck it, I want to give my shot at it. I don't know if I did good or not, but it's a it's a thing. I don't know if it'll work because I don't know what the profile is for. I don't know if it's for the like Discord's freaking. Okay, sorry, I was messaging that. But yeah, I took like an hour break to not kill my voice. And well, now I'm ready to record chapter 4 and the last video I'm recording today. Because in all honesty, I'm going to kill my voice if I don't. So, I was rereading the whole fic for like the third, fourth time because I was bored. After I finished recording, I was bored. So I was like, fuck it, I don't want to find a new fic to read. I'm going to reread this. And one of the chapters actually revealed his eyes are yellow, like the manga. And I was like, oh fuck, I'm a dumbass. So I'm gonna go with yellow eyes from now on, unless he's using his quirk. So that's a thing. Anyway, I'm just gonna get on to it instead of fucking whatever the hell I'm doing. Anyway, Shota had endured some pretty terrible fevers in his time, from overwork, from grief, and even quirk-enhanced sickness. He knew what a fever dream felt like, and the previous day certainly hadn't. Maybe, though, if he was very lucky, it would turn out to have been a quirk-induced hallucination instead of a quirk-induced transformation. Alas, when Shota pried his eyes open and lifted his head, he found that he was still in the form of a cat, still slightly woozy from the drug, or the rain, or both, and still in an unfamiliar place with no windows. Shota was lying on his side, a soft surface beneath him. His back was pressed against something warm, and there was a warm weight resting on his side, heavy and grounding. He almost slipped away into sleep again, exhaustion still lapping at his limbs. But he remembered Shigaraki's hand looming over him, Kuragiri's voice dragging him out of the rain, and he forced himself to stay awake. "The cat's awake," Dobby's voice said from somewhere above him. "Thank you, Dobby." Kuragiri appeared in front of Shota, and he couldn't help the instinctive flinch. Sure, the mist villain had managed to contain himself in a dress shirt and slacks, but his head and hands were still clouds of rolling mist, rolling smoke, and it made Shota's arms ache where the Nomoon had shattered his bones. Dobby snorted, and the weight on Shota's side shifted, stroking down his fur. "He's scared of you." "A great deal of creatures are scared of me," Kuragiri informed him blandly, reaching a misty hand toward Shota. "It rarely lasts long." The fur along Shota's spine prickled, and he pressed himself against the wall at his back. His heart raced and his ears flattened to his skull. A hiss built up in his throat, and he bared his teeth at the mist man. "Careful, old man," Dobby snapped, and a scarred hand batted at Kuragiri's. "You can't force him to like you." "I wasn't trying to," Kuragiri said, ducking his hand under Dobby's to settle what amounted for his fingers under Shota's nose. He smelled like rain. If Shota had tear ducts, he might have been crying. Kirigiri smelled like rain in springtime and the crisp, clean thunder scent of Obero's hair. It had been years since Obero's death, but Shota would never forget. There was nothing at all that smelled like it, except now. This villain that had threatened his students time and time again, and the scent was multiplied a dozen times by a cat's strong sense of smell, and Shota couldn't breathe. You see, Kurogiri said, and his voice was so wrong attached to this familiar scent that it ripped Shota away from his memories, leaving him reeling. The first thing that he noticed was that he'd managed to shove his whole head into Kurogiri's mist, so far that the vague shape of fingers was visible. Shota quickly pulled away with a sharp sneeze, shaking his head so hard his ears flapped. Okay, that's actually a little spooky, Dobby said. I think I need to text Toga. The weight on Shota's side lifted away, and Shota pulled himself to his feet and turned to see what it was. The weight was attached to Dobby, because it was his hand, because Shota had been sleeping next to him. Shota vowed then and there to never, ever, no matter who asked or why, tell anyone that this had occurred. Ever. Unaware of Shota's internal crisis, Dobby had pulled out a cracked smartphone and was typing away at the speed of light. It doesn't appear that there are any lasting effects of the cat's time outside, Kurogiri said, and Shota found the mist villain's head tilted down towards him. The man's eyes, while obvious to a human, were almost invisible in cat vision. Just two tiny patches of paler mist that weren't moving. You're welcome, Dobby grunted, distractedly by his phone. Vroop! With an incoming text. Your service is much appreciated, Kurogiri told him. Before Shota even had a chance to brace himself, he was being swept up into Kurogiri's arms. Shota would actually appreciate if no one ever picked him up again. For a moment, Shota considered. The League didn't know that he was a cat, or that the cat was him. They thought he was just an ordinary cat, nothing special about him. And Kurogiri, at least, was very unlikely to kill a random cat for doing cat things. He was the one who had scared off the hooligans that picked Shota up out of the alley after all. He had picked up a stray cat with no collar, and not even an indent in his fur, where he'd slipped one. Picked him up straight off the street, and expected him to just be fine with that? He couldn't get away with everything just because he smelled like Obero. Shota twisted abruptly in Kurogiri's arm, sinking his teeth into the man's sleeve. To his surprise, he had skin underneath, and Kurogiri dropped him with an undignified yelp. Ha! Dolly let out a bark of laughter. What was that about cats liking you? Kurogiri reached down, but Shota quickly shook off his surprise for being dropped and was already moving, dodging the man's hands and making for the edge of the couch. Of course, Kurogiri wasn't going to chase him like a regular person. Shota saw the portal before it even opened. The air twisted in front of him, scrunching in on itself. By the time it bloomed into curls of black smoke, he realized it was a portal, though. It was too late. Instead of trying to dodge, he flattened his ears to his skull and dove straight through the opening. he found himself dropping out of the air right into Kurogiri's arms again. Well, Shota knew how to deal with that already. With nothing in convenient biting range, he dug his claws into the villain's vest and clambered straight up him, squeezing out from under Kurogiri's grasping hands like a furry snake. Shota leapt off from his living perch and onto the scratched coffee table in the middle of the room. From there, Shota jumped to the floor and was off like a shot again, bolting for the edge of the couch. Another portal twisted the air, but this time Shota knew what was coming. He skidded around it, and the one that popped up a few seconds later, and again until he rounded the couch. The room was split nearly in half, and the higher part was a combination of a breakfast nook and tape room. Shota had split second to take it in before he was hurriedly dodging another portal, and he immediately bolted up the short 2 steps to the tape room area and made for the collection of expensive-looking bottles lined up along the back counter, dodging portals left and right. The second he jumped onto the counter, the portal stopped. Dobby noted, was laughing like a hyena. Oh, he got you pegged, Gurry, Dobby cackled. Going for your fancy alcohol? It's like he knows you. It appears this may be no ordinary feline, Kurogiri said, and Shota pinned his ears back and hissed furiously at the approaching villain. There wasn't a lot he could do against a league of villains as a cat, but that didn't mean he was just going to give up. What do you mean by that? Shota froze at the familiar voice, his tail puffing up as Shigaraki stepped into the room. He looked like any other teenager, dressed in a loose hoodie and 2 short black jeans, wearing only 1 sock and no shoes. He also looked severely dehydrated, with chapped lips and dry wrinkles around his eyes. Shigaraki Tomura, Kurogiri greeted, tucking his arms behind his back. The image of a proper gentleman's butler was marred by the claw marks torn into its vest. But Shota was not even a little sorry. It was the least he could do. It appears the cat I brought in from the rain last night is far more clever than a standard animal. I suspect it has a quirk of some sort. Why? Shigaraki scowled, idly scratching his neck. Animals with quirks tend to be smarter and more capable of cohabitating with humans than otherwise, Kurogiri explained. And if Shota had eyebrows, he would have raised them in surprise. Just how sheltered was Shigaraki if he didn't know simple facts like that? Like Nezu? Shigaraki grumbled and wandered over to fling himself into the recliner opposite Dabi. Quite so, Kurogiri agreed, although Nezu is an extreme example, as his quirk includes an innate cognitive enhancement. Shigaraki muttered something under his breath, and then dug a handheld console out of the pocket inside of the recliner. Keep the thing around, I guess. Maybe Sensei wants it. Shota suspected Sensei meant all for one. The way everyone in the room flicked a gaze at the TV stand shoved into the corner at the far back of the breakfast nook only confirmed his suspicion. It came as no surprise to Shota that they were planning to break All for One out of Tartarus, nor that they were collecting quirks for the man to steal. Kurogiri turned back to Shota, who immediately started hissing at him again. Shota wouldn't have expected that a person made of living mist could sigh, but Kurogiri somehow managed. Would you please get off that counter? Kuragiri asked. Shota backed up a step, so he was standing further from the edge of the counter. He'll fit right in with the rest of us, Dobby drawled, despite not even looking up from his phone. With one eye still on Kuragiri, Shota started carefully eyeing the fancy alcohol bottles arrayed around him. Obero's dad had owned a bar, and all four of them, Obero, Hisashi, Shota, and even Tensei, had worked summer jobs there before Obero's death. So Shota knew quite a bit about alcohol. Most helpful at the moment, he knew which of these bottles were actually high-end alcohol and which were Cordels in fancy bottles. There was a raspberry Cordel that was mostly empty sitting next to the edge of the counter. And Shota put one paw on the cap and then made direct eye contact with Kuragiri. Please do not, Kuragiri said, channeling the energy of every unruly cat he'd ever met. Should have patted the side of the Cordell bottle, nudging it a centimeter closer to the edge. Don't, Kuragiri said sternly. Shota hadn't listened to anyone's stern voice since he'd moved out of his mom's house. He pushed the bottle off the edge. The bottle hit the floor with an almighty crash. Glass shards exploded out from the impact, and concentrated fruit juice splattered every surface, coating the floor, cupboards, and even getting up onto the counter and bar. Shota ignored the droplets of Cordell that landed in his fur to stare Kuragiri down with dead-eyed gaze. Dobby was cackling again. And he'd finally set his phone aside to drape himself over the back of the couch, resting his chin on his hands and watching Kuragiri slowly lose control of his physical form. Even Shigaraki looked mildly interested, glancing up from his game. You sure about this one, Guri? Dobby snickered. You might want to throw him back onto the street. Indeed, Kuragiri agreed darkly. Shota's ears perked. There was an idea. If he made himself enough of a nuisance, he'd likely get dumped back out onto the street somewhere. He'd just have to make sure not to be too much of a nuisance, or they might just kill him from frustration. Shota threaded his way through the bottles and decanters, setting several of them rocking or rattling as he passed. He was careful to stay in the thick of the bottles, not willing to give Kuragiri the chance to grab him. But he was equally careful not to actually tip anything over. He wasn't here to cause wanted destruction, just to get his point across. What's going on down here? A reptilian head poked out through the doorway. I heard a crash. Kuragiri's trying to tame that feral cat he picked up last night, Dobby drawled, and Shota quickly shot off the instinctive shoot of adrenaline that pulsed through his feline body at the reptilian features. He was undoubtedly Spinner, who had a gecko quirk, and was not a snake, and so his cat instincts definitely didn't have a problem with him. And if they did, Shota was going to make them not have a problem. It doesn't look like it's going very well, Spitter said cautiously. The best part, Dobby said eagerly, is that he was like, oh, all animals love me. I'm a Disney princess. Right before the cat bit him. I suspect that this particular cat might know more about me than most others. Oh, yeah? Spinner came all the way into the room, peering at Shota over the bar top. Shota glared at him, pinning his ears back and puffing up his hackles again. I believe it may have a quirk of some sort, Kuragiri said. Until the nature of its quirk is revealed, it would be prudent to keep it around. Shota's heart skipped a beat. If they were waiting for him to reveal his quirk, they'd be waiting a long time. Revealing a racer would be a death sentence, especially if anyone made the not at all unbelievable leap from black cat with eraser quirk to shapeshifted eraserhead. What for? Spinner asked, and Shota narrowed his eyes at Kuragiri. Quirked animals tend to have more raw power, less skill-based quirks than people, Kuragiri said, and it's much easier to reclaim the quirk of a feral cat than a person. Shota hissed at him, sinking lower into the bottles of alcohol. This time, he forwent the corridors entirely, instead targeting a pricey vermouth that someone had left just a little too close to the edge. He nudged it closer, ears pinned. Do you think it understands us? Shota, not Shota. Spinner asked cautiously. Shota pushed the vermouth closer until the corner of the bottle peeked over the edge of the counter. I suspect that may be likely, yes, Kurgari said, sounding resigned, bracing himself for the crash. Shota pushed the vermouth over the edge. There was no crash. From his vantage point on top of the counter, Shota hadn't seen the portal twist into existence until after Vermouth had vanished through it. Kuragiri caught the bottle with ease, and the portal winked out of existence. If I stop trying to pick you up, will you leave my bar alone? Kuragiri asked. Shota lashed his tail, narrowing his eyes at Kuragiri. You can always go back to breaking things later, Dobby offered. I'll even help. The worst part was, Shota actually believed him. Then again, Dobby did seem like the sort of person who enjoyed wanton destruction. He was at least set things on fire a lot. Although Dobby was right, so long as Shota didn't let anyone close the door behind him, he could get to the counter again, and he already demonstrated that he could dodge Kuragiri's portals. With as much dignity as he could muster, Shota jumped off the counter. Not to the ground, of course. The floor was still covered in a sticky mess of cordal. Shota wouldn't want to walk over that even if he was wearing his boots. It would be a nightmare to get out of his fur. Shota leapt from the counter to the bar top to a bar stool, and finally down to the clean ground beyond the bar. Are you negotiating with a cat? Shigaraki snorted. I'm negotiating with an asset, Kuragiri clarified, giving Shota a wide berth as he went to fetch a towel for the floor, just as you have in the past. Shota might have been offended by that, but it looked like Dobby was going to take an offense for both of them, so he let it be. Sure enough, Dobby and Igaraki very quickly devolved into a loud argument, leaving Shota to explore the room. It looked a lot like the descriptions he heard of their old hideout, the one Bakugo was taken to. The layout was different, of course, but the general vibes were still there. The room was divided by two short steps running the length. The counter of bottles was against the back wall on the higher side of the room, and there was a large TV against the same wall on the lower side. Beyond the bar was Beyond the bar, there was a scuffed kitchen table that looked and slightly smelled like it'd been dragged out of a dumpster, complete with an electric mismatch of unmatched chairs. There were 3 doors in the room, each in different walls. The one that Spinner and Shigaraki had come through was in the lower section of the room, directly opposite the TV, between the table and the bar top, where most breakfast nooks should have a window of some sort. There was a door built into the wall. It was mismatched with the wall, made of buffed steel that looked out of place in the domestic setting, and it smelled faintly of ash and blood. Finally, on the living room side, there was another door squeezed between the love seat and Shigaraki's recliner. It held a sole window in the room, and from the scuff marks in front of it, Shota suspected it led to a mudroom slash Genkan hybrid. For the moment, that would be his goal. The cat found the door, Shigaraki grumbled, and Shota dodged a half-hearted kick from his socked foot. Just don't let him out, Kurogiri said, finally finished cleaning up the mess Shota had made. At least the mess on the floor and cabinets. He moved on to wiping down the remaining bottle once by one. A task Shota suspected would take him longer than it was worth. Pretty much the exact second Kurogiri finished his sentence, the door flew open. Shota was off like a shot, bolting for the opening. The young man standing in the door let out a shrill squawk and scrambled out of the way. Shota's right that the door led to a mudroom. There was another man behind the first, working on unlatching his boots, while the door was still hanging slightly open. Shota lunged for the opening, claws scraping over the concrete Genkin floor. "Shut the door!" Three different people shouted. The man was too slow to respond, but the door's aforementioned Shota was the only single path to freedom. He saw the air twist, knew a portal was forming right outside the door, but there was nowhere he could dodge to. In an instant that smelled like Oberon's clouds, Shota was on the other end of the room again. There was a hasty thud and the door had closed. "Kitty!" The young man Shota had bolted past squealed like a schoolgirl, clapping his hands and bouncing on his toes. Now that he wasn't racing for his freedom, Shota actually had a chance to look at the newcomers. They looked suspiciously familiar. The young man with the combed flat white hair, and the older man with elaborate swirling markings spiraling out from around his eyes. Shota couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen these two before. "Is that the same cat we saw on the train?" the older one asked, and realization dawned on Shota, like the day of the first end of term paper. Nichiko and Kamen, the two from the train. They were villains? "Of course it is," Nixo squealed. "Aw, look at this cute little yellow eyes." Shota tilted his head, curious. He was almost positive his eyes had been black when he checked the mirror this morning, but it had been his first experience with cat eyes, so it made sense he got some colors wrong. To think yellow eyes were black, though, that was pretty extreme. "Toga?" Shigaraki interrupted, peering out between his bangs. "Inside the mudroom." "Sorry, Shiggy," Nichiko or Toga chirped, vanishing back into the mudroom and quickly closing the door before Shota could even move towards it. It opened again a moment later, and Toga waltzed through, a few blobs of gray ooze still clinging to her hair from the transformation. "Kitty!" Toga sing-songed, bouncing forward with glee. Shota hissed at her, lashing his tail furiously. "Don't," Kurogiri started, but Toga was not dissuaded. In one swift motion, she leaned down and scooped Shota up into her arms. Well, Shota knew what to do from here. She was cradling him on his back like a baby, so he couldn't get the leverage to claw himself out of her hold, but It put Toga's face right over him. He went for her eyes. Shoto was dropped abruptly, hitting the ground to a cathartic sound of Toga shrieking. By now, he'd been dropped so many times that he landed on his feet automatically and was moving before he needed to think about it, bounding away from Toga and slipping under the couch. The room was silent for a beat, then Kamen, who was likely not named Kamen at all, cleared his throat. I'm gonna go. I'm going to fix my makeup. A door shut, and Shota heard muffled footsteps retreating on the other side. Hey, Dobby, you should tell twice we have a new cat. We do not have a new cat. Shigaraki snapped, and then started cursing viciously. Shota crept to the edge of the couch, peering out at Shigaraki. There was a pile of dust in his lap, and Shota noticed the suspicious lack of handheld gaming console. Shota had seen enough anti-gravity incidents to infer what had happened. This is your fault, bloodsucker, Shigaraki howled, scratching viciously at his neck. Dobby snorted, and had it been anyone else, Shoulda might have agreed. He had to disagree on principle, unfortunately, and then Shigaraki pulled an identical gaming console from the same pockets of his chair. And Shoulda couldn't resist a feline snicker. It wasn't like anyone would hear him anyway. That's this chapter. Yeah, this is the chapter I realized his eyes are actually yellow. Whoopsie daisy. Anyway, check out the other videos, because I think I have shed shit that I haven't said. I'm gonna call it good here, though, because my throat is dying. And sorry about the Discord notification, I'm not cutting it out.